Hey, it's me, Rose La Fabiloca, and we are going to take down white supremacy, one pendejo at a time. This is the Sabe podcast. Mi gente, how is everyone? Boy, do I have an episode for you today. First off, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has been subscribing and sharing my videos. You guys are the best. This really helps my reach and to flesh out these topics in an impactful way. So thank you guys so much. Really, each and every one of you. You guys are being so helpful. Now, we have gone through so many topics already, and we are now on our 9th episode, you guys. Can you believe it? We have barely touched the surface and yet are already on our 9th episode. It's really crazy. Second on the list is a big welcome to anyone who has jumped on the bandwagon recently. Welcome. On this channel, we discuss current racial, social, and political issues concerning communities of color, and I put forth as much effort as I can to deliver in a way that isn't going to make the whites too offended. Because if anyone needs to hear this, it's them. But a close second on the list is my Hispanic listeners, because we have a lot of issues regarding racism and colorism in our community, amongst many other things. So if you have not already, please watch episodes 5, 6, and 8, where I have laid the foundation in order to bring us to our episode today. See, we are a very layered community, steeped in complexity and nuance, so it's important for you to understand what Hispanics are before you dive into a higher level topic like racism and colorism in regards to our community. So this episode will be yet another one with a few visuals. So if you are streaming via the Apple platform, just know that you are missing out on the full experience. Therefore, I encourage you all to stream this on your Roku's or Fire Sticks via the YouTube app in order to get the full experience. I will try my best to describe what we are all looking at over here, but I cannot make any promises since I already have so much to say. And with that being said, I'm going to get a disclaimer, okay? I'm going to offend a lot of people, okay? People are going to be very upset with me after this episode. They're going to be very salty and peppery with me after this episode because Hispanics do not like to be highlighted in a negative light. But I don't give a damn. I'm going to talk to my people the way they need to be spoken to because this is a community I am from and I know how they are. So I'm going to die on this hill happily. In order to prove my point. I don't care who doesn't like it. So anyway, if you're all caught up, let's jump right in. Today we're going to start off with a prayer because I need protection from these crazy asses. So let's start the episode with some prayer. You can pray to whatever. You could pray to, if you pray to God, if you pray to the universe, if you pray to the freaking stars, I don't care. Buddha, whatever. Here we go. Just keep your energy, just give me good energy. That's all. Dear Black Jesus. Yes, I pray to Black Jesus. I do not pray to white Jesus. I don't know who that man is, but that is not Jesus. Please shield me from these racist ass Hispanics that are going to flood my DMs with their illogical explanations for their problematic behavior. And to the titis and tios that are all going to sit around and talk shit about me because they know that they've been racist as fuck and do not want to acknowledge it. I know you and you know that they're only like this because this is Christopher Columbus's fault. I know you got me. I'm going to say bless and never stress. In your name I pray, amen. Now, we're going to be using a lot of English and Spanish terms in this episode, so rather than overwhelm you with all of them at once, I'm going to explain them as I go and include visuals for better understanding because I am personally a visual learner myself. So when we discuss racism in social groups and on the internet, what exactly does that mean? Because a lot of people are throwing this word around for literally any video or picture or comment they see. And it's in the completely wrong context. And I have to physically stop myself from doing the internet thing of hitting reply and schooling them. So racism, as defined by Oxford Dictionary, means prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. So I emphasize typically because typically minorities and marginalized communities are the ones who are subject to racism. So this is not to say that the whites can't experience some form of racism, but it is not common occurrence enough for them that leaves them unable to live their day-to-day lives. Okay, white people. So when a white person says they've experienced racism for their skin color and everyone in the room squints, then you know why. Now, colorism refers to prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. So this definition makes it explicitly clear that colorism is a term that describes specifically people of dark skin tone being the subjects or victims of this kind of treatment, because they're the ones of color. Hence, colorism. So can a light-skinned Hispanic like myself experience racism even though Hispanic is not a race? Yes, because I'm part of a racial or ethnic group, okay? Now, can I experience colorism? No, because I am not of dark skin. Colorism disadvantages dark-skinned people while privileging those with lighter skin. And this is where understanding Hispanic nuance comes in. As a light-skinned Hispanic, yes, like I said, I can experience racism due to people and their prejudice and discrimination toward Hispanics, but I am not subject to colorism, which means being that I'm closer to the scale of white privilege, I am less likely to be denied access to opportunities and housing due to my skin color. And the history behind that is that in the United States, colorism has roots in slavery because slave owners typically gave preferential treatment to slaves with fairer complexions, while dark-skinned slaves toiled outdoors in the fields. Their light-skinned counterparts usually worked indoors at far less grueling domestic tasks. So slave owners were partial to light-skinned slaves because they often were family members. Slave owners frequently forced slave women into sexual intercourse, and light-skinned offspring were the telltale signs of these sexual assaults. While slave owners didn't officially recognize their mixed-race children, they did give them privileges that dark-skinned slaves didn't get to enjoy. So accordingly, light skin came to be viewed as an asset in the slave community. So that kind of mentality has also been a part of Hispanic colorism, which is why we share a lot of the same issues as Black people. So as a light-skinned Hispanic, this goes back to my episode regarding why I do not identify as white. My refusal to identify as white is due to the fact that my ancestors did not get an option into interracial mixing. And so therefore, I do not find it to be a sense of pride to categorize myself with my oppressors. That makes no damn sense. However, I do use my whatever power I do have to push the Black community upward. So for light-skinned Hispanics who are resisting this call to action so much, I do not understand why. You have so much proximity to white privilege. Why don't you fucking use it? That's the difference that you can make. Wake up, puta. Why don't you fucking see that? You see, in our culture, many of our warm-skinned sisters have been raised in families that refer to their blackness in the diminutive. Diminutive meaning small, making them, diminishing them, essentially, for those that have failed their SAT. And diminutive terms in our community are words like morenita, negrita, pretita, gordita, blanquita, etc. For those that also failed Spanish, whenever we add ita or ito at the end of words, is to make whatever term into the little version of that word. For example, the word for sister is hermana. So if you refer to your little sister, you say hermanita. Capiche? So in our language, morena is a term referring to brunettes. At least that's what they teach you in school when they're teaching you fancy Spanish, like freaking Castilian. But in the Hispanic world, we also take words and apply them differently depending on region. So amongst a lot of Hispanics, especially Caribbean Hispanics, morena can refer to a tan person or a Black person, or can be a term used for someone who may be light-skinned but very obviously displays African ancestry, like mixed girls with curly brown hair or dark features overall, like brown hair, brown eyes, etc. So saying morenita will often refer to little brown girl or little Black girl. Negrita comes from the root word negra, which means Black girl or woman. So if we say negrita, that means little Black girl or little Black woman. Now, Prietita comes from the root word prieta, which can also refer to someone with darker features. And gordita comes from the root word for fat girl, which is gorda. So if you say gordita, you're calling someone a little fat girl, which aunts and uncles will swear is a sign of affection. But really, it's just a way to invest in your future of bulimia and freaking anorexia. And then blanquita comes from the root word blanca, referring to white girl. So if you say blanquita, you're saying little white girl, which is can be used as another diminutive word in our culture as well. Because I've also had aunts telling me, they'll call you blanquita and be like, you're the whitest Dominican I've ever met and stuff like that. And it's like, but the way they're saying it is like trying to make me feel like I'm not part of something, or that I'm like outcasted, or like they kind of treat you, if you're a white Dominican, like you're like an albino Dominican. And it's like, no, Dominicans are all colors, like because of our colonization, but we're still Dominican. We still have African ancestry. Like, why are you othering me, essentially? So this is another layer. When I talk about us being layered, this is what I mean, you guys. Because in our culture, we grow up being referred to a lot of times not by our actual names, but rather nicknames based off of our skin color and physical features. So you can imagine you have to grow up to have a very tough skin in our culture because of the way it's so easy to internalize being stripped of your name and given a title that's completely centered around what you look like. And especially as a woman, it makes it increasingly difficult to learn to love yourself for who you are, because all you're hearing other people say and see about you is what you look like on the outside, and then they tell you that doing so is love. So it's just a very toxic way of like self-awareness and what you perceive yourself to be rather than who you are, and trying to separate the two and unlearn all of that toxic behavior as you get older. So where did this all begin? Well, first, I'm going to use the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico as examples because of their history tying in so nicely to the American experience, and because as someone who is half of both, I can say with authority and conviction that I have spent the last 25 years of my life living in this community and its issues. So please note, when I'm talking about these things and calling people out, I'm speaking from actual experience in a myriad of different spaces and time periods of people with different levels of education and experiences, so you all can understand how embedded in this shit that it is, that these people don't even notice it in their day-to-day lives. And it's why I understand Black people and white people so well, because I have seen both sides of this play out my entire life with family, friends, and strangers. And I want you guys to understand one key point. Each Hispanic country has their own history with colonization. So I'm stressing to you all that what has happened in Dominican Republic should not overshadow the fact that all Hispanic countries have a race issue. Even in countries like Puerto Rico, where you'd think they'd be more progressive being a U.S. territory. But that's not the case. The problem with Puerto Ricans especially is that they do not like to be criticized at all ever about anything, which leads them to have blinders on when we talk about topics like this. Puerto Ricans can tend to be not only racist towards skin color, but also prejudiced against other Hispanic countries. And growing up for a large part of my childhood around Puerto Rican influences, I did not understand why I got so much flack from my Central and South American friends regarding why they tell me I wasn't the usual kind of Puerto Rican they'd meet. And it's because a lot of them have experienced being put down by Puerto Ricans for a large part of their life. Puerto Ricans are indeed extremely prideful, but it also comes to a fault in the States because a lot of them want to be so far away from anything unpatriotic to America that they will ignore things that are right in front of their face. Instead of using their energy to chase social American issues, they would rather spend the entirety of their energy talking about what Dominicans are doing. Because the reality is that Dominican Republic has so much African ancestry and are so close in distance to PR that a lot of them see DR as their Black people that they like to make fun of. Boom, roasted. So we have been raised in families who refer to Blackness in a diminutive, meaning, morenita, negrita, prietita. And a lot of our dark-skinned cousins and friends have been silenced by elders and encouraged to partner with people who have lighter skin than they do so they can mejorar la raza, meaning, to improve the race. Like a lot of them, when it comes to American race issues, they're like, soy puertorriqueño. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm so proud of my African ancestry. I do not have this issue with race. Then if we talk about Hispanic Caribbean race issues, because they're Puerto Rican, they're like, soy americano. I'm American. This has nothing to do with me. I have papers. I'm a citizen. I'm not a migrant. Like, they be playing both sides. They're like the freaking Geminis of race in the Hispanic community. They like want to do both things. On the one hand, they're too Puerto Rican to address American race issues, and then on the other hand, they're too American to address Hispanic race issues. It's like, bro, you're both, my G, so you need to put both of your energies into both issues. And this is why I talk about layers, you guys. Layers. I'm Puerto Rican, and I'm telling you this because this is what we see. Like, I have had so many Puerto Rican friends over the years just be like, either totally not understanding the nature of what we're talking about right now, or the other side of it is like they're so frustrated by their own community because they're like, these people are so ignorant. Why are they like this? You know, like these second generation American, you know, states born Puerto Ricans are just like, they're more progressive, so they're looking around expecting their community to take part because they understand their history, and the elders are just like not understanding. The elders in Puerto Rican culture see themselves as just Puerto Rican. They don't like to do this thing of like, well, I'm actually mixed, because this is the reality, you guys, and this is what I've been trying to push all the time. Just because you say you're Hispanic, all that's saying is that you're part of this shared culture of colonization from Spain, which is why you speak Spanish now. Spanish is just a language that was thrust upon us because we did not speak Spanish before Christopher Columbus got there. They spoke their native language, the Taino Indians. Then when Spain got there, they pushed religion on them, they pushed language on them, they pushed slavery on them, and so this is where you started having ethnic mixing. And so the reason why I'm going to use Dominican Republic as a really great example of all of that, to really tie a home for you guys, because I really want you guys to grasp this concept about Hispanics, okay? The reason why I'm using DR as the main example is because the Dominican Republic was basically a hub for the Spanish Empire at that time, where they were taking over all of these countries. So they had a lot of conquistadores like Francisco Pizarro, who was working in and out of Santo Domingo, which is the capital of the Dominican Republic. So Dominican Republic has a heavy Spanish influence in there. Now, we're not going to go through the history of DR today, as that would take forever, but it's important to mention that at this time, the native Taino Indians that were left, some 60-ish thousand of them, were made into slaves forced to mine gold. So when we see movies like Pocahontas, I roll my eyes because many people saw the character of Governor Ratcliffe, which I will put a picture here of him, as having been Christopher Columbus or inspired by Christopher Columbus. And for those kids who grew up sleeping through history and only being raised on Disney movies, many of them have confused the Native American timeline with the Christopher Columbus timeline, because kids in school for a long time were taught that he discovered the Americas. So I think somewhere between that character thirsting for gold and interacting negatively with the Native Americans in the movie, people assumed his character was Christopher Columbus. But let me be clear. Christopher Columbus never, for not one single day of his life, not one, stepped one single foot in America. He never did. He never got there. He never met Pocahontas. Pocahontas is a separate story altogether that will be addressed another day, but today is not that day. Christopher Columbus brutally killed native Indians in the islands of Hispaniola and paraded their dismembered torsos in an attempt to deter future rebellions and maintain order. So this was the kind of behavior, along with disease, that caused the Taino Indians' population to decline in mass quantities. Now, as the Spanish continued to rule beyond Columbus and settle into these new lands, Spanish colonial society operated off a pyramidal class structure, and this is the time where you really begin to see white supremacy be birthed on a large scale. Prior to these countries becoming empires, class systems were a lot simpler. You had the monarchs, the high class, the peasants, and then the slaves. But the concept of a more complex social classification didn't really exist, because it wasn't until people started exploring other lands and trying to conquer them and control them that we saw the birth of a social order that over time became rooted and embedded into people's psychology. So after enough generations of the nearly extinct Tainos just living within the society, the Spanish didn't have to try so hard to keep things in order, because they became the law and order, and they became part of the people mixing with the Taino Indians and the African slaves. So eventually the entire society was just made up of these people that were all mixed in these different areas. And on top of that, the Spanish were a more superior empire at that time compared to these other islands. These other islands were just with these native Indians who were living very simply. So you have to really get it in your brains that Spain at this time, especially Europe in general, they were creating weaponry and they were becoming more advanced. They were having more advanced technology for that time, in the sense of like being able to take over other lands. And at that time, that's what people did. If you ever watch Game of Thrones, that's what they do. They go to different lands and take over and kill people and rape the women. So this was the same thing that was happening, and it happened to the islands of Hispaniola. So as Spain continued to take over basically the planet at that time, this was the kind of mentality that was brought forth and eventually just became status quo. So I'm going to put the pyramid up from the Spanish social class system. I want you guys to pay attention for this pyramid. For my friends who are streaming on the Apple Podcast app, don't worry, I will be able to talk about it, and so you can visualize it visualize what we are seeing on YouTube right now. The pyramidal structure had a small number of Spaniards at the top, known as the peninsulares. So for clarification, peninsulares were Spanish born in Spain. Okay, so the Spanish put themselves at the top, of course, of the pyramid because they think that they're the best thing since sliced bread. The Creoles were people of pure European blood, but they were born in the New World. So basically, people who were essentially from Europe, but they were resettled into these areas. Then underneath them, under these two groups of white people, basically, were mixed race people. So you had the mestizos, which were Indian and European blood people, so Taino Indians plus Spanish. And then you had mulattoes, which were African slaves plus European blood, so basically that black and white mixture. And then underneath all of those people, they had Sambos, Native Indians, and Africans at the very bottom, meaning African slaves and stuff. So going back to the beginning of the episode, someone like myself who is a light-skinned Puerto Rican and Dominican would be categorized back in that time as part of the mestizos and mulattoes level, which would put me in the middle-ish level towards more the bottom of society, being that I'm mixed with African, European, and Taino blood, much like the rest of other people who are Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican, etc. So when we discuss white privilege and what it means in terms of a marginalized community like Hispanics, it's saying that the closer you are to that upper portion of the totem pole, the more responsibility you have to help the people who are seen as the bottom of society. Now, a lot of people look at stuff like this and think that that's just how it used to be and that it's not like this anymore, because especially Caucasian people in America love to talk about how hard they were for what they had and that they don't enjoy this idea that they have it easier than other people. But the reality is that this isn't something that isn't just an opinion, and I need you all, the whites, to realize that. To walk around saying that white privilege is a farce is a complete disregard to the long-standing history of basically the entire damn planet, because the Spanish were not the only ones to colonize other less developed and advanced regions, and as you can see clearly depicted on this triangle, not much has changed. Watch me edit this to a modern example so you can visually see how little has changed. Look at this shit. As you could see, in the American class system, not much has really changed other than our incorporation of many other races, because this is America. At the very top of the pyramid, we have rich white people, and then underneath them is middle class and poor white people, because even though you may be living in poverty, you are still white, okay? Now, any race mixed with white is underneath middle class and poor white people. So these people who, they have some white in them, so they get a little bit more. And Asians, because white people all think that they're very intelligent. So even though they can be racist against Asians for immigration and stuff, for the most part, they just assume that they know everything. So they don't get treated as poorly. They just get a lot of racist statements like they can't drive and they're really smart and they don't have a social life and they're always doctors and shit like that. Then on the right of that, on the other side, is white passing individuals like light-skinned Hispanics, Middle Eastern, and African Americans. You know, like the white shaded people in those communities that don't get treated necessarily as bad as someone in their own ethnic group if they are dark-skinned. Then underneath all of those people are all other races and ethnicities of color. So people, you know, black people that are in any other racial group. If you have black Middle Eastern people, black Hispanics, etc., etc. And then you have black people just in general. And then you have newly emigrated Hispanics, because this country can fucking not with the idea of Hispanics being immigrants here and are locking them up in cages and separating them from their children and all types of shit, selling them for sex trafficking. Go look that up. And then on the right, on the bottom, is black LGBTQ plus people, because we already know that we already know how society treats black people in general, let alone if you're, God forbid, you are part of the LGBTQ community. There is that. I mean, I guess I could have added white LGBTQ on the lower totem pole, but at the same time, you still have white privilege, so like, you know, there's that. I mean, if you don't think white privilege is a thing, look at the fact that we have had 52 presidents in the U.S., with 51 of them holding office, and only one out of the 51 of those presidents has been of color. And even the one of the 51 that we have had is actually half black and half white. So again, we have yet to see a person who is fully of color hold the highest noble title, which I don't know that it's seen as a noble title anymore since Donald Trump has completely ruined the presidency. But we have yet to see a person of color fully hold the highest noble title of this land, and it is 2020. So you tell me what kids of color and black kids think when they look at history, American or otherwise, and wonder how much potential do they really have to become president. That an old white man who has no experience in politics can be given the chair of the presidency sooner than maybe, I don't know, like a black queer woman. Because oftentimes when people stomp around asking for a female president, let's not beat around the bush. They usually picture it being a white woman first, because this country has taught us in regards to feminism that feminism was made for white women, and the rest of us are just an afterthought. That white women have to be the first ones to actually make something a right before it actually becomes recognized and endorsed for other communities of color. You guys think that Taino women or the African American slaves weren't thinking, gee, I really wish I had rights, until the late 1900s when white women were begging for the chance to vote? For a long time, white women in the majority were perfectly okay with not having rights because it was the status quo in their religion, and they believed it was their biblical duty to shut the fuck up and defer everything to their husbands. Mind you, there are still women who are like this today. They're called Republicans. Let me stop. Anyway, this social class structure became a way of life for many centuries. So now that we know where some of the foundation began with colorism in our community, let's fast forward to an era closer to the 21st century, which was the ruling of dictator Rafael Trujillo in the DR. Alright, now Trujillo is public enemy number one for Dominicans. Think of how Cubans feel about Fidel Castro. This was a similar situation. Let me put up a picture of him. There we go. Look at this potato head hijo de gran puta madre. Alright, so Trujillo did a lot of bullshitting in the DR, but we are going to focus on race relations. One of his many heinous crimes against his own people was his belief in, quote, racial cleansing. He feared the darkening of Dominican people and publicly promoted anti-Haitian sentiments. He was racist as fuck, especially against the Haitian people, and in one particular incident, just to show you guys how racist he was, he ordered the slaughter of 20,000 Haitians in what is known as a Parsley Massacre. It's called that because Trujillo reportedly had troops kill people who didn't pronounce perejil with a Spanish inflection. And you know how he was made to make up for it? He gave a measly $525,000 to the Haitian government. Yeah, apparently 20,000 Haitian lives is worth $525,000. His entire dictatorship was surrounded by the violation of human rights for the citizens of the Dominican Republic as well as Haitians. And Blanqueamiento, or whitening of, like racial cleansing, is a social and political policy that was popular among many post-colonial countries, including the Dominican Republic. So this is why I say it's not just DR that has this issue. This ideology promotes the diluting of black blood by introducing and propping up immigration from European countries while simultaneously driving out black people and encouraging the races to mix in the hopes that black people will disappear from the population, okay? And this plan to lighten the race, it included allowing more Jewish refugees to enter the country, as well as exiles from the Spanish Civil War. He tried filling universities and hospitals with light-skinned professionals to create a great presence of whiteness in professional areas. Some say he even tried altering the merengue dance so that it would more be modeled after the European waltz. So Dominicans were also often encouraged to marry white partners or partner with lighter skin, with the hope that the nation would become more successful the lighter its citizens began to become. So it's safe to say that in Dominican Republic, especially when it comes to their relationship with the Haitians, they often treat Haitian people the way that Americans treat Mexicans. Like, this is an island that's shared between these two countries, and while the Dominican Republic government has been very crooked, so has the Haitian government as well. And so it's just one of those things where, like, look at how they try to invalidate, they meaning the Dominican government, try to invalidate Haitian people who had Dominican citizenship up until a certain point. So I mean, you can look all that up as well, but it's just they have a long history of these tensions because there's a lot of Dominican people who have an issue with race, and a lot of that has to stem from this post-colonial era and having dictators like that, like Trujillo. Dominican Republic also operates off of a certain kind of social system. So, for example, when I went there for my 16th birthday, I was told that a lot of Dominicans see certain physical traits as traits of higher status than others, coming off of the post-Trujillo era. Like, for example, having straight hair versus curly hair, being dark skin versus light skin, since the assumption is always that people with dark skin usually work outdoors. I had experiences where we'd be sitting at a red light and there would be poor Haitian and Black Dominicans sticking their hands inside of the car to beg for money, or they will randomly throw a soapy sponge at the window of the car and start cleaning it at a red light to get you to tip them some money. Or I made a huge mistake of wearing a 4th of July themed shirt because my birthday is July 3rd, and we'd be approached by a ton of little kids, and I remember this little Haitian boy selling branches of limoncillos in Santo Domingo during our tour asking for money. And we'd say we didn't have any, and they'd be like, but you're American. And, the Dominican Republic is just extremely poor. So they revere Americans with this high regard to money and power that is not seen so visibly in the life of someone who lives in a third world country. So I'm not going to get into all that right now because I will be addressing that later in my American privilege episode. But the point is that in Latin America, we are still to this day dealing with the effects of Spanish colonization, racism, colorism, etc. The Dominican Republic and the rest of these other countries have a long way to go. And the reason why it seems that things are so slow moving is because of the fact that they're in a third world country. Now, to close out, I want to draw home this example because while Dominican Republic is just what I used to show you guys a little bit of our history, it's important to understand that racism and colorism is something deeply embedded in our culture. And even as a light-skinned Latina in America, I have internalized a lot of these ideas as well. For example, my sisters and I have all profusely straightened our hair for years and years and years. And it wasn't until my 20s that I had this come to Black Jesus moment where I had to realize that straightening my hair was something I internalized growing up. In instances like watching my mom sweating bullets to try to blow dry all 3 of our hair for picture day, or going to the salon to get my hair blown out for something important, hair is a really big part of Dominican girl culture, and we have been bred to believe that our curly hair is just too difficult to manage. There's too much of it. It's frizzy and thick. It's complicated to take care of. It can be very coarse, and it's just easier to straighten and not have to do much to it for a few days. And it's a mixture of that internalized social system along with a mixture of American convenience. Because in America, everything is about convenience, even if it's at the cost of losing your curl pattern and natural features. American culture and the idea of beauty, those standards have never been representative of what it means to be naturally Hispanic, to have these natural features that are not being seen in media every day. So I want you guys to see that even as an intersectional feminist, a proud Hispanic, someone well educated and well versed in Black culture and community, I do not know everything. There is a vast amount of information to be learned. And I have internalized these things that I'm talking about to you guys, so you guys can really see that even as someone who's very self-aware, who's very aware of my history and the world around me, I still deal with these ideas that have been passed down to me by how I was raised. And it's a daily effort to try to let go of these lies that I have been raised by. So this is what this podcast is really for. This is me publicizing my effort to break the generational curses in my family, in your family, in my community, in your community, by research and discussion about really important events that have happened to bring us here today. You know, one big component in our social structure is our idea of family within the Hispanic community. And you are socialized young to believe that family is the backbone of your life. And with that comes these very complex relationships and these passed down traumas. You know, in epigenetics, it explains so much about why people like the Black community and Hispanic communities have such deep-rooted traumas. And it's because these traumas are actually passed down in our DNA. And I will discuss this more in depth later when I talk about inherited community traumas. But epigenetics is basically when a trauma leaves a chemical mark on a person's genes, which is then passed down to subsequent generations. And the mark doesn't directly damage the gene, so there's no gene mutation. So science has found that many of the times when trauma is thought to have echoed down the generations via epigenetics, in humans, it's linked to the darkest moments in histories. Wars, Holocaust, slavery, famines, and genocides are all thought to have left an epigenetic mark on the descendants of those who suffered them. So I really commend you guys who know you have generational curses in your family that you want to break, and you are looking to really absorb this information and know how to be a better person, a better you, a better ally for people of color. And now with that being said, tune in tomorrow for Friday Night Special, where we will be taking a look at social media for the week and having some fun with the craziness of the world. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time. Bye!